Well, good morning. We are, there you go, okay, let me give you a minute. Good morning. When I do stuff like that at an event in Britain, everybody says, God, you're so American. After a good session, I'll be like, clap for yourselves. And I'm like, really? No. So it's wonderful to be among my locals. So I'm Ashley Gordon. I am the Publishing Market Development Manager for HP. And we are privileged this morning to start our conversation about the book business with Mary McAveney, CEO of Abrams Books. Mary is one of the most respected leaders in publishing. She is known for her genuine love of the book and her genuine like of her authors, which are not always the easiest people to like. But she is also respected for a deep knowledge of the book business, which comes from her many years of experience in a variety of positions. She is special among publishers, dare I say rare, for her willingness to try new things, to take risks, and to innovate. And she does that not only with the proverbial gut instinct of being in the industry forever, but also with an acknowledgement of the value of data and the added benefit of knowing how to use that data. Those two things don't always go together. Most importantly about Mary, and I can say this from having worked on many projects with her, she is willing to listen to everyone in the room, and that is probably one of the characteristics that has allowed her innovations to be successes. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us last night.
That was
nice.
a pleasure. Yeah, it was great to meet all of you.
So Mary, if you would you tell us first about Abrams Books?
Sure. Abrams Books. So I want to preface this by saying I actually started my career at Abrams too many years ago to count, and have come back. And when I left, Abrams was predominantly an art book publisher. And we have, in that time, migrated to publish a robust selection of children's books. Most well-known is the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series by Jeff Kinney, as well as making inroads into fashion and lifestyle and cooking. And so the company has changed enormously, but it's still illustrated adult books is at the core of our business. And that is really one of the most important things that we can focus on. That and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is the engine that created a lot of the runway for that to happen, to really evolve the company.
And Mary just came off the tour of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, so we are equally lucky to have gotten her after that thrilling but grueling experience.
Yeah, no, it's an impressive, it's a truly impressive tour. And if you could see, people kept saying to me, you have to go on tour, you have to see the reaction that the kids have when you put these books in their hands. And you can't really imagine it until you see it, and you see just how rabid they are about books, which, as I'm sure you know, in this day and age, bringing up readers and making kids passionate about books should be all of our mantras here.
So you said this was not your first stint at Abrams. So starting in 1992, and then on a journey to 2022, when you took over as CEO, give us an understanding a little bit of the various places you went, because I think your experiences really inform a lot of that willingness to innovate and that understanding of data. So it's a slightly different path, maybe, from some of the other CEOs that we've heard in the past.
Sure. So I started at Abrams in sales and marketing. At that time, it was one department. And they did a handful of very eclectic European-centric children's books at the time, but I was always trying to find the children's audience. And so someone said to me, that's really, you seem to have a passion for children's books. I think you should go work at HarperCollins because they have the best children's books in the business. And luckily for me, there was a position open and I moved into HarperCollins and I worked on all of their major properties. So Shel Silverstein, Maurice Sendak, Laura Ingalls Wilder, the I Can Read books, and it was phenomenal. They were beginning to brand their franchises at that time. And one of the things that I felt really strongly about, I was still in the marketing role there, but I worked very closely with those authors and those estates. And one of the things that I learned is just how important the production quality is to artists like that. So Shel Silverstein had very exacting standards that he wanted his books to be published under. The same with Maurice Sendak, the same with the Chronicles of Narnia estate. They were all quite involved in how those books ultimately looked. So that became, something that I absorbed there, and was a fairly natural extension from Abrams, because the production qualities of Abrams were extremely high when I had left. So anyway, I moved from Harper to run children's marketing for Simon & Schuster. Really different experience, different kind of corporate culture. Stayed there for a few years, and then I started consulting for a lot of different companies, including an ongoing consultancy for the C.S. Lewis estate, Open Road Integrated Media, and a number of small, Walden Media, Walden Pond Press, a number of small, scrappy, independent booksellers, book creators who all had a mission to get kids to read more. And I had young children at the time, so I totally bought into that mission. I was, definitely on board with that. And then as my kids got older, it sort of dovetailed with a need that Open Road identified for someone to come in and really revamp the way they were marketing their ebooks. And so we had a leadership change at the time. We had a change in direction, and I was part of that. And I saw that the right kind of marketing, the right kind of effort, particularly around backlist books and particularly around digital, was something that publishers weren't really focusing on at all. And so we felt like there's this little crack, in the industry, and we can fill it, right? We can help authors and publishers sell more backlist books. We can help them sell in digital. And so we really launched what today is a pretty robust program. So we started with about 10,000 books that Jane Friedman, who was the former CEO of HarperCollins, had acquired in her first 5 or 6 years. And then we went on to partner with over 90 publishers and built that to, I think today it's close to 100,000 books that they're managing. And Abrams was one of the clients. And so Michael approached me and said that he was thinking of retiring, and would I be interested in working, in his stead at Abrams. And of course, I was so thrilled.
A lovely full circle.
Yeah, lovely full circle. It was great.
So for this audience, some of the things that you just heard that will be of value. And are you sticking around a little bit today? So whatever we don't get to today, you will have other opportunities to talk with Mary. So a deep understanding of the production value of the book and the origin of where that comes from. I think sometimes when we are being asked to do remarkably difficult and to us on a production side, seemingly inconsequential things, that those requests do come from a source, that it's not the arbitrariness of a designer necessarily. It really does have a reason, and sometimes that's not always communicated all the way down. So the reasons behind why a book needs to look and feel and be made the way it is, as well as, I think, a tremendous benefit to all of us, that rediscovery of backlist and how to market backlist and how to keep those print books alive by helping readers find them.
That's right. That's right. One thing I should say is what we were doing at Open Road, and Brian actually helped with the first study we did around this, was we were helping sell more print books while we were marketing the digital. So we had, because we were anxious to bring publishers in and invite them to be part of what we were doing, we knew that their focus was print, and we wanted to make sure we weren't hurting their print sales by heavily marketing the digital. And what we found was just the opposite. We were actually helping their print sales, helping, not hurting, but not even a flat line. We could see a direct correlation between the marketing of digital and the increase in print sales, which was just, we were overjoyed. We really were. We want everyone reading in any format. And you asked me about data, and that's where I really started to hone my appreciation for data. And consumer data specifically. With the right consumer data, you can put the right book in front of the right person. And my mantra throughout my career has been, we really need to own our relationship with the consumer. And that is something that people try to do, but they don't devote the appropriate resources to it. And often it becomes sort of maybe a half-hearted attempt at putting a newsletter together and sending the same newsletter out to everyone who signs up for your list. I mean, it's a real science to creating something like what Amazon has created in terms of their relationship with their customers. There's a lot that goes into understanding what people are reading, what they're looking at, and that's how we can increase the demand for print, audio, every way that people read.
So for us, that means we don't need to be afraid of ebooks. We don't need to be afraid that publishers are promoting their ebooks, that it's going to continue to drive sales for everything that we do as well.
Yeah, and I think I'm imagining that no one in this room is afraid of ebooks anymore. I know there was a time when ebooks first, came on the scene, and everybody thought that ebooks were going to take over print. And I think you'll find that there are still adamant print readers who would not touch an ebook with a 10-foot pole. And there are many people who read both formats interchangeably. That's how I read. If I'm on the subway, I like to have a book on my phone so that I can, pull it out when I need it or want it. But I also have a stack of print books, and I think that's most people's experience today. So no, I wouldn't suggest anyone be afraid of e.
So in 2021, I'd say we all had it's kind of bad to say this, but we had a really amazing year from the print perspective. Record sales, record printing, some incredibly difficult supply chain challenges, but there was a bit of headiness, dare I say, irrational exuberance, and we all just kept going, printing all those books. And now we've come crashing back down to earth. And those numbers are no longer there, and particularly for a lot of us in the room who are primarily domestic production. So what do you see, what is the current landscape of print book and the book industry today, and not the future, but just over the next couple of quarters? Where are we? Are we through the backlog of that massive inventory that we were all carrying? Are things getting back to normal? How does it feel now?
Yeah, I think I can say we're getting there, and I think that's true of the industry as well. I don't think anyone honestly is completely through that backlog. I think there are financial implications, as I'm sure you all know, to just writing off, tens of millions of dollars worth of inventory. So I think that people are really cautious. I think if you read, I'm not saying anything here that isn't completely public, but there's been a lot of pullback in the industry and a real focus on profit and the bottom line. And a lot of that is affecting how much we print. And so we're trying very hard ourselves to balance, what we can perceive or forecast as demand for a book, have enough copies available to us when we need it without overprinting, which of course is the magic that is publishing when it works.
So of the realities that you're facing now, how is that driving behavior? So one of the things that this group is dealing with is despite 2 years of a lot of partnership and reliance on one another to get through that supply chain crisis. We have seen publishers go back to some of their previous pandemic behaviors, and they are printing heavily overseas, and they are really focused on unit cost. So what is it that's driving that? And what might make that change?
Yeah, so what's driving that? I mean, if you think about a publisher in 2021 and 2022, where it was difficult to get the right amount of inventory, they were intentionally ordering up, right, in order to cover themselves because they couldn't replenish quickly. And so that resulted in, honestly, a huge backlog of inventory. And I can tell you that some publishers, including us, really took out loans to pay for that inventory, assuming that it was going to sell through. And then when that inventory did not sell through and interest rates went so high, publishers are in a really precarious spot right now. Even if you're a company like HarperCollins, and I don't know their financial situation at all, but even if you could borrow from a sister company that is cash heavy, there's an interest rate that's applied to that borrowing. And that puts a publisher in a very difficult position. So the knee-jerk reaction was, let's scale way back, right? Let's not print anything, not one copy more than we have a projection for or an actual account order for. And, and if we have to reprint 1,000 times at 500 copies each, then that's what we'll do, but we can't overreach. And so there was that sort of pendulum swinging in the other direction, which in and of itself didn't make a whole lot of fiscal sense either, right? Because those tiny print runs are expensive. And so you weren't really saving any money. You were avoiding the inventory trap, but you were still in this cycle of paying a lot for what you had to print. And I will tell you that the big thing that changed for us was less about all of that. I mean, that was a pretty big thing. But we also saw the freight costs come down, way down. And so that made printing in, Asia or overseas much more palatable, right? I mean, no pun intended. But it opened up that channel that had that layer of cost on it that made the U.S. printing a lot more competitive. Right. So it wasn't just a decision, we're going back to our old habits. There were market forces that were pushing for that. And so we publish a lot of really rich illustrated books. Many of those are printed overseas. We have to balance the timing, right, of what we can print in the U.S. with the cost of printing in Asia versus the U.S. So those are the two metrics that we're often using. Now, on the adult illustrated books, I will say that we are seeing, because we're starting to look at the data, that there's a fair amount of price elasticity among the consumers for these, essentially what they become our luxury goods items. So we can absorb a little bit more cost in the U.S. for timing because we can adjust that price up a little bit. Now, where we're seeing absolutely no price elasticity is in children's books. We have hit the ceiling on children's book pricing. And so that becomes a real issue for us. Like, how do we control those costs? How do we do, the right amount of printing at the right time, at the right price? And that's something that Annette, who's our head of production and publishing operations, is constantly working through with all of you. We value the partnerships of the printers here in the U.S. We could not do The Diary of a Wimpy Kid without printing in the U.S. And that is a very happy story of great pricing and great timing. Can I share the data? Yeah. So I don't know who's here from Warzala. I'm such a big fan of Warzala because I don't know how many of you know this, and I'm probably not supposed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Jeff Kinney delivers the entire book right after Labor Day, and that on sale date is October 24th. And we have to put the whole book together and print it and get it to our accounts for a national one-day on sale date of October 24th. And we absolutely could not do that with the folks at Warzala. Certainly the folks at Abrams work literally around the clock on that when it comes in. His editor, his managing editor, his designer, and we get it rolled out, knocking wood, every year. And it's just a remarkable feat. And I know that Jeff has gone to Warzala. I know how much he appreciates that relationship with that printer. I would love to have more relationships like that, where we have a problem and we work together to resolve that.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. So there are instances where domestic production makes sense, and there are elements of the relationship between you and your print providers that would say, yeah, we're coming back. And it might be a little bit higher, but that's okay because of these other aspects. What makes that good partnership, or what drives that decision to print domestically instead of overseas? Like if these guys are thinking, okay, I want more business back home,
right?
What do they need to be thinking and doing with their publisher customers to make sure that they win that business back?
So for me, and Annette, you should all find Annette after this, because she has the real answers, and I'm just, she's probably sitting there saying, please be quiet. But I think from my perspective, the biggest win from you all is the timing, right? And so we just spoke this morning about increasing the number of titles we actually do reprints on. Right now it's capped at a certain level, but if there's a way that we can expand that, do more reprints here, get them in faster, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what you all can provide, but where we're struggling right now is in forecasting and reprinting quickly. So if you have solutions around that, I'm all ears. Let's talk about what we can do together, because those are our challenges. And, we have a book right now. It's a terrific book about Carolyn Bessick Kennedy. It's a fashion book, and we are going to be chasing reorders on that all season. And we just want to have the book in our hands, and we want to be able to get it out to customers. And we're working on a number of data pipelines that we can use, so we know where there are pockets of books that aren't selling, and we can move them to where they are selling. But the bottom line is sometimes we actually just need more books in hand, and that's where I could use your help. So that's
So you mentioned forecasting.
Yeah.
And that's actually, we've got a panel coming up this afternoon about forecasting. It's something that publishers traditionally have been really dreadful at. Is that fair to say?
It's a hard thing.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. So, but at the same time of their traditionally being dreadful for a lot of really good reasons, the post-pandemic environment has encouraged publishers to invest resources in getting better at it. Mm-hmm. Could you go a little deeper into what makes it so hard? I understand that recently some large retailers have changed their ordering patterns to be much closer to pub date. So you're going to press without nearly the order data that you would have once had. Obviously, there are things that pop up in the world of whether it's something that happens in the news or social media, and Book Talk suddenly discovers a book. I mean, there's so many elements that are unforeseeable. So as you are trying to get better at forecasting, what are the elements of that you think you can impact?
Right.
Where you can get better? And is there anything that your print providers can do that might help you move that along? Because they'd certainly like for you to get better at it too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. And that seems to be the question of the year. What are we doing to get better at forecasting? Let me tackle it from that perspective. Sure. So I think the person who's giving the talk on forecasting today is Gary, right? Is that right? So we've hired Gary to help us with forecasting. And I think you have to think about forecasting in two ways. One is the demand at the account level, and the second is the demand at the consumer level. And so very often, the demand at the account level often will come in about where the rep expects it to. If it doesn't, there are levers that we have to pull that we can adjust for that. I think where we have issues is in visibility of inventory at the account level. So there are certain accounts that make their inventory situation very visible to us, which makes our lives much easier. But there is one in particular where there's a huge black hole, let's call it, in terms of inventory. We know what we shipped. We have some POS information, but we don't full on know where the books are at any given time. Are they on the store shelves? Are they in the wholesaler's warehouse? Are they in the warehouse of the retailers they serve? And it's a real issue. So that creates difficulty for us, both in the sell in and in the sell through. So one of the things we're doing in terms of our revamped data operation is trying to tap into any kind of information we can get from those accounts, whether there's an API, an internal system, something that we can actually access that will give us more visibility around that. Very often, we will think we are running low on inventory, print another 3,000 or 4,000 books, and then that account will return 10,000 books. And so we're then in an overstock position. So it's critical that we have that visibility. So that's one thing that makes forecasting really difficult. The other thing is trying to measure the impact of media. So we have a fantastic publicity team, and they get terrific media. What we are doing now is trying to measure every media hit and how much it drives sales. And that's something that I'm pulling from my Open Road playbook, because we could tell within 100 copies or so how much a certain marketing tactic was going to affect sales. And we don't have that same ability here at Abrams. So that is something where once we have that in place, and we know going in that the morning shows are going to cover this book, or the New York Times is going to run a piece on it, we'll know how much to expect from that, and we can factor that into our printing decisions. But right now, that is not something that is factored in. It's anecdotal, but there's no hard data around it. So one of the things that I've been talking to Annette about is how can we make the reprint process faster and easier. And I was curious at Frankfurt to see the permabound functionality that Keith built for Ulysses, or for permabound. And there were real guardrails around what you could order, right? There were guardrails around paperweight. There were guardrails around trim sizes, and by guardrails I mean you couldn't just pick any size. You had to work within, at least as I understand it, you have to work within these parameters. And if we knew that, going to press and using a standard trim size meant a faster reprint at the other end, that would be something we would need to factor into going all the way back to when we designed the book. And those are things that we would love to hear from you, or I would, to understand how can we make this just a more efficient process for everyone so that we can get what we need and you can get the business.
Do we need to put an asterisk down that a publisher actually used the word standardization before anybody else did? that actually embracing the idea for the benefits of the efficiency to make sure that we can make the books.
Right.
Okay, so speaking of efficiencies in making books, one of the other panels that's happening this afternoon is around sustainability. And in the US, the demands around a sustainable book haven't quite reached the same levels as they have in other parts of the country. So you mentioned Frankfurt. A couple of weeks ago, we're in Frankfurt, and there's tons of discussion around sustainability, much of it being driven by government regulations that are going to impose behaviors on publishers and print providers. And there's some question as to what degree those regulations over there will impact us here. So it's a two-part question, I guess. From Abrams' perspective internally, what is the role of sustainability? And for the most part, we're talking about environmental sustainability. But then also, as a global publisher, to what degree do you anticipate you will have common expectations of all of your providers, even if they're not necessarily in the regions that have the government-imposed regulation?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that we are wrapping our heads around in terms of sustainability. We are owned 100% by a French-based company, and we're trying to understand what the sustainability laws for France, do they have an impact on us in the US? We also have a joint venture with Chronicle Books in the UK where we ship our books to the UK for sale throughout Europe. And how do the sustainability laws there impact what we're shipping over? And those are things that we are grappling with right now. And so we're sort of at, in the whole pyramid of sustainability, we're sort of at the base at the moment. We're just trying to understand what the regulations are, because right now we're not seeing a big demand on the consumer side for sustainable products. We're seeing a lot of confusion about whether or not what the different designations mean. What does FSC mean? Do people really are they really going to choose one book over another because a book is more sustainable than another book?
And pay more for it.
And, I think when you're buying paper towels or bed sheets or, something that is interchangeable with another product, then you, as a consumer, are more likely to say, oh, this is the tipping point. This is sustainable. This is recycled paper, bamboo, however you want to think about it. But on a book, people they're not so interchangeable, right? If you're looking for a specific book about, if it's your favorite mystery author, you're going to buy that book. You're not going to buy a different mystery author's book because it's made sustainably. So it's really going to be, I think, and it's just my opinion, but a top-down regulation-driven, government regulation-driven effort, because I don't see really convincing consumers that you have to give up reading Colleen Hoover because I don't know if her books are printed sustainably or not, so it's an unfair example, but I just don't think people would stop reading her in favor of someone whose books were printed more sustainably. So maybe we have a marketing effort, that has to happen, but that's a pretty big lift.
What about internally, your employees?
That's a really good question. And I have heard from printers in the room that their employees are demanding that they use more sustainable methods, that they're inclined. I have not heard from our employees that demand. But I do think that's a really good example of where it could bubble up from if it's not regulatory.
Do you have a sense of where you would start with what you would be asking first of your print service providers? Have you gotten that far into understanding what the regulations will be? Is it ink? Is it paper? Is it renewable energy? Is it the source or capturing heat or any?
Yeah, I would guess the starting point would be paper for us, paper and ink. But, recognizing that alone has so many splinters about it. And what about paper? And it just, there's a lot to tackle there. But that would be my inclination.
So where do you see the opportunities in the next year? what is exciting? What's going to grow? What should we all be looking forward to?
Yeah, I think that what I'm looking forward to is really establishing that relationship with the consumer for Abrams, because I know that there are people out there who are reading a ton. I know there was a sort of dismal Pew Research piece that just came out saying that the number or percentage of adult readers reading one book has dropped. But so many people are reading, and I feel like we're not fully measuring what everyone is reading. We have a preconceived notion of, how and what people are reading, and that is largely print-focused. Studies are largely driven by publishers, not unlike mine, where the focus is on print. And you're not really capturing, the millions of titles that are published every year by self-published authors. You're not counting the information that's getting through on podcasting, on video, on different kinds of formats. So I know that's not necessarily a welcome message for the folks in this room, because it does sort of spread the ingestion of information across a number of different platforms. But just introducing someone to a book via a podcast or a YouTube video or an animated platform or a Netflix series, all of those things create a demand that will affect everyone in this room really positively. It's really about how are we understanding those consumers, what they're looking for, and then feeding those platforms with the right information so that they can find books. I don't think reading will ever end. I really don't. I mean, someone very wise said to me, people have been predicting the end of the book business since the first book rolled off the Gutenberg press. And it's true. I've been in the industry very long now, and just about every 5 years, somebody's predicting the end of the book, and it's not going to end. But I think the way, and this is true of every media right now, not just books, the way you reach consumers has become much, much more splintered. And there's not one aspect, not one big hit that you're going to get that's going to have the same impact as it did 20 years ago.
That's actually really good news for us, even though we're talking podcasts and ease and lots of different ways for people to access content. Forever, we in the book business were reliant on a handful of players to get the books into the consumer's hands. So that was Barnes & Noble, and then it was Borders, bless their hearts, and then it became Amazon.
Yep.
And Barnes & Noble is back, would you say? Do you have confidence in James Daunt and Barnes & Noble and how they're reigniting? I think there was a big profile in the New York Times just a couple of weeks ago about the Breathe New Life. So tell us just a little bit about the traditional way of finding a book and the importance of the bookstore and how much we should be gunning for the health of the bookstore.
Yeah, look, I think we need to be gunning for the health of the bookstore, and Daunt is clearly, very focused on books and print books and really reviving that in the U.S. And I think he's also taking a very intelligent look at what needs to be done. So that means often taking an 8,000 square foot store and condensing it into a 1,000 square foot store. So the net might be less shelf space, but more stores and more communities where people can go and find the books that they want to buy. So I think it's a really smart strategy. I think Barnes & Noble would not have survived without that kind of strategy. I see that independent bookstores are proliferating. More and more are opening all the time. And we have a very good and direct relationship with our independent bookstore clients. And we feel very strongly about supporting them. we have a program with Bink that helps struggling booksellers, come out of whatever issues they're having. So I really believe that those are places where books are being discovered, and we have to support that area of the business.
From a print book perspective, talking again about the discovery process in non-traditional places. I think we had a time where online book selling became predominant. In bricks and mortar stores were weaker, and there was a lot less coverage in the trades. Not as many reviews, not as many people talking about books in the standard media, and the book became commoditized. It has something to do with that lack of price elasticity. If you could get a book and it's always 50% off, it's always discounted, then it's just a commodity that has no value. But do you sense a shift in, say, with book talking about books, the resurgence of physical bookstores, kind of shifting a bit off of online book selling? Do you see a reevaluation of the print book as something to value? It's not just a commodity.
Yeah, I think so. It's a really interesting question, I had never really considered, even with all of the elements that you're talking about. I still don't know that the book was ever really a commodity. I don't think it comes back to the discussion we were having around sustainability. One book isn't necessarily interchangeable for another, and it's not. The Amazon pricing strategy was not about selling a person on a book that was 50% off versus a book that was full price, honestly, as much as it was about undercutting their competitors and offering the lowest price and driving consumers to purchase from them. It wasn't necessarily about commoditizing the book as much as it was about commoditizing the consumer. So that is still very much at play. I mean, Amazon is often at publishing houses the largest account. So they are, you hear in the news they don't separate out their book business, so you never know exactly how it's doing, but it's still quite strong. But I don't think there is a reduction in number of reviews happening in review journals. Even PW has reduced review coverage. The New York Times has reduced review coverage. Major daily newspapers have sometimes eliminated review coverage. So I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but publishers must have a relationship with their readers, because all of those channels, all of those third-party ways of reaching readers are slowly disintegrating. And if we don't establish that relationship with those readers, they're not going to be able to find our books. Now, I say that, and someone challenged me and said, oh, but you'll always find it on Amazon. Yes, you could.
You already know that's what you're looking for.
Yes, exactly. That said, we are overhauling our metadata so that we can make our books more discoverable when they are not on independent bookstore shelves. Because the reality is, with the volume of books that are being published every year, booksellers can't take every book. There is no bookseller that's going to be able to take the full breadth of every book that's published. So there are books that will only be discoverable online. Again, that's not a bad thing for the folks in this room. It's not a bad thing for publishers. It just means we have to think about it differently. We have to measure differently, and we have to adjust our behavior.
So, okay, I don't mean this is a gotcha question.
Okay.
But you've hung out now with a bunch of book printers for the last evening and today. Has anything surprised you of what you've heard, or getting to know them, being in their midst?
That is such a good question. I mean, everything surprises me all the time. But I think I guess this shouldn't be a surprise, and it isn't. But the level of care that you all feel for books and creating readers, I think is just phenomenal. It's just a really, it makes me feel like I'm not in this alone, that we are a community and you're not vendors, you're actually part of what's going to get us to the next level of publishing and book sales.
That's a good one. And that one got me at my first BMI event. Someone that will go nameless, but got a little teary talking about books. And that was when I realized, oh my gosh, they care every bit as much about making the books as the publishers do about finding and distributing the books.
That's right.
And that was wonderfully reassuring. Okay, so there's time for Q&A, but last question for you, which is not meant to be a gotcha either.
Gotcha.
But it's always good to be able to go out of the room and do something differently than the way you would have done it when you started. That's what makes time together meaningful. If you were to say to this group, here's what we could do together that might look different. Like if we all go back to our offices or our Zoom calls in the next couple of weeks, and we wanted to look at our relationships with our publishers differently, or look at the book business and our position in it a little differently from how we did when we first started this conversation. What would you say to a room full of people who make and love your books as much as you do?
Yeah, I'm going to say something that comes, again, back to the consumer. So I went to visit our French owners shortly after I took the job, and I went to the Paris book show, which was just a marvel because it was publishers with stacks and stacks, tables stacked high with books, and thousands of people coming through and buying books from the authors that they loved. And it was such a wonderful moment, and you could see that everyone there really, cared about books, were passionate about books. And I talked to them a little. They're very proud of how the French government approaches literature and protecting small businesses, small booksellers, printing. They create a lot of funding for printing within the country. So they really are supportive of the arts and publishing. But one thing that struck me, and I've been talking about this with anyone who will listen, so I'm going to talk about it here, is they have a government program for children, so ages 14, 15, and 16. Every year on their birthday, they are given 500 euros via an app to buy books. Wow. And if anyone took a look at not just the COVID bump, right, that we all saw with people reading, but the bumps that happened every time people got a government check. You could see that whole the payouts of those checks resulted in an uptick of book sales every time. And if people were given, particularly children, I am so passionate about creating the next generation of readers through children. If they could be encouraged not to buy video games, not to buy, things that would distract from reading, but just let them choose whatever they want to buy with this $500 a year, and they find it to be phenomenal. So I'm on a mission to find a cohort of people who could support something like that, not just printers, but a real grassroots kind of effort around that.
Yeah. Good morning, and thank you. That was great Q&A there. Very broad question here, or maybe just let you go with it. What are the discussions around artificial intelligence, AI, at Abrams these days? And that can cover a lot of areas, I realize, but we just hit the 2 or 3 top areas within AI that you see as an impact on the business and potentially the folks in this room, our business.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I can tell you that I recently asked the folks at Abrams if they were using AI. And I had assumed that particularly the younger folks in the office who likely used it in college were probably using it. And the answer was, we didn't know we were allowed to use it. And so that was sort of eye-opening. And I talked to another CEO of a Big Five publisher, and I told him that story. He said we had the same experience, and they had done a whole survey of their company, and everyone came back saying, we didn't know we were allowed to use it. So, you know, I'm very much in favor of balance, and again, coming back to the consumer, no consumer wants a book written by AI, and you know there have been many already. So we're not even remotely thinking that that is a direction we would ever go in. I have in my career looked at AI narration of audio. It is awful at the moment. Maybe it will get better, but at the moment it is terrible. So what we can use it for are things that are simple and time-consuming. Our sales folks are now using it to put together PowerPoint presentations for their accounts. You know, we're looking at using it in our metadata. We're looking at using it to write press releases, to do catalog copy. There's a lot of tasks that it can be extremely good at. And those are the things I would like us to really investigate further. But I think the big question is around the creative process and how is that going to be impacted by AI. And I think that is a real concern. And I think, you know, we've talked to agents, we've talked to authors about, you know, how we deal with that contractually. And they are covered. I mean, you cannot, you know, obviously you can't violate copyright law when you're creating anything, including AI creations. So there is air cover, but I think there's going to be a demand for that to be a bit more nailed down in the future.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks again for being here.
Sure, thank you.
Many of us follow Circana and the predictions of the market, but from your standpoint, Abrams, whether it's the juvenile business or the trade business, how should we be thinking about volumes for 2024? What do you think we should be?
Yeah, so where we are right now is, like many publishers, not as good as 21, 20, or 22, but better than 2019. And I heard somebody talk about resetting, right? So if the pandemic hadn't happened, what would have been the growth rate from 2019 on? And that is roughly where we are at the moment.
Are we anticipating that we're going to continue at that fairly solid growth rate?
I think that's what people are expecting, yeah. That there is going to be that slow but steady growth. Right now, Circana is down about 4% over last year, which is not, it's not dramatic, actually. It's over a very strong year, it's still above 2019. So, 2022 for the first half was quite strong, which again is how so many publishers got into that inventory situation.
Do you see bestsellers as picking back up again and driving sales like they did before the pandemic, before backlist started taking over?
Yeah, that has changed, Ashley. That's really interesting. We're not seeing necessarily a bestseller drive a lot of other sales beyond that. That's
just the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that is really an interesting change.
Right, Jack?
He's third in line.
Oh, sorry.
Again, Mary, thank you for coming and taking your time to address us all. That's great news, by the way. I think we like that answer a lot. Good question, Ashley. It's kind of where I was going to go is with the backlist struggling a little bit right now. We all feel that pain. How is the shift to the front list? Is that a priority right now to help out and boost top line?
Yeah, so right now, I'll be honest with you, I'm still getting used to the pace of legacy publishing. Right now, Frontlist is driving growth. And what we need is to shift into having backlist absorb more of that expectation of growth. And that's a focus for us in 2024 is how can we, even if we picked 200 of the 2,000 backlist titles we have, how can we really create demand for those and keep that moving? so that all of the, we aren't leaning so heavily on front lists because, as you know, front list is a very expensive proposition for growth.
Early on in your talk, you mentioned the importance of forecasting. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what role printers can be playing in your thinking about how to do forecasting. I know the deep dive comes from Gary and Ken's panel with Kathy.
Yeah,
Maybe from your perspective, what's the role of a printer?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and the only thing I can think of, and this isn't the answer in and of itself, is sort of speed to market. Like how can you help us when we haven't forecasted well? We're going to come to you and say, how fast can you get us that book? And that's not fair. But I'm curious about how you all can help us. I don't know the answer to that question, but I would love to learn the answer to that question. If there are things that you're doing for other publishers, if there are ideas you have about forecasting that we should be adopting, this is a critical area for us, and I am really hoping to learn more by talking with you.
One of the things we talked about when we were coming up with this discussion is load balance. And to what degree can publishers and print service providers work together to mitigate against those highs and lows and risks and finding yourself without at the same time that your printer doesn't have the capacity. So is there a way to look at yearly anticipated volume over very predictable titles and work in that unexpectedness?
That's right. Yeah, we did talk about that. And that would be ideal for us if we could have access, again, I think it comes back to standardization and some of the things that we talked about earlier. But if we could have almost access to a press or access to printing services that could cover us in those ways. And it's almost like, I guess I think about it almost like a mutual fund, right, of titles where there's a bunch that are out there and we're not quite sure which one is really going to hit, but if we could be ready with any.
If they all had similar specs and they were all set up and ready to go, and then it's just flip a switch.
Good morning, Mary. Thank you. First, maybe a statement and then a question, if you don't mind. Just so you know, of the printers in this room, there's been a tremendous amount of investment made over the course of the last, let's call it 5 years, really more than that, domestically to support the publishing community. And recently it continues to go. So it resonates to me that the publishing community spent a lot of money to make sure you had books during the crazy spike, and it cost you and it hurt. Well, in this case, we're so focused on keeping work here because so much money's been spent to support the publishing business. So I just wanted to make sure
good to know.
You heard that.
Yeah.
A question for you around the consumer. The way we buy books is very different now than the way we used to buy books, right? When we walked into a bookstore, we were motivated to buy a book. Sure, maybe we wanted a title, but the idea was we're going to browse and we see something and it looks good, we might buy that also. If I know that I want that Colleen Hoover book, I go online and I get that book, right? So considering the consumer's way of procuring has changed, how has publishing changed to fit that? And how can it change?
Yeah. So I think publishing needs to change to fit that. I don't know that everyone has changed to fit that. But I think we have to really take hold of the reality that people are buying online, they're searching online, they're finding that book online. And if we want that browsing experience, then our metadata for each of those books has to be amazing. And I think that there is a collective effort around metadata in publishing so that people do find those things, but I don't think that it's anywhere near where it has to be. I think having not just the relationship with the consumer, but an understanding of what that consumer is looking for, having content available to them that isn't just a sale-focused website would help with that sort of replacement of that browsing experience. But I think the question Ashley asked earlier about, does a bestseller now continue to drive a lot of, ancillary sales? And the answer is it doesn't. I think it's exactly because of that, because they're going after the one book they know about, the one book that they've heard of, and they know they're going to want, and there's very little baked in discovery. And something that I helped build at Open Road was in fact a discovery engine, and that is integral to what publishers need to do. We have to be able to create that discovery in other ways because of all the reasons we talked about. Not just I know about Colleen Hoover, but I don't know about these other 600 books that I might also be interested in. And also, thank you for everything you've built to help us and to help keep the printing process here. I mean, we do appreciate it, and I know that at Abrams it was crucial. So it ended up in a bit of pain, but I know that we're going to get to the other side of that, and then it'll be a little smoother.
One last one.
Mary, thank you for being here. Great presentation. So kind of this discoverability question, connecting it to standardization, given your background in marketing, do you think books need cover treatments like spot gloss and embossing? Because they move away from standardization. Are they really necessary for discoverability?
They're not necessary for discoverability, 100%. They're not. What they are necessary for is on the shelf when, a young teenager is looking for a book and one cover has, amazing effects and another is less so. And it's the same, romantasy kind of topic and we're trying to break out an author. I think there is a marketing case to be made for that kind of, I would say, a limited special effects on a cover. Do we want to do it on every cover? No. In fact, right now we're looking at going back and de-speccing a lot of our backlists so that printing is faster and easier and more streamlined. But I could make a case that you need to be competitive in that way.
Okay. Thank you both very much. Really appreciate it.